This chapter will cover listening skills.
So, in order to really think about this issue, we have to ask ourselves, what is the difference between hearing and listening? Well, listening skill is the first language arts skill that we ever learn, and we develop this before a child even speaks. Now, hearing, on the other hand, is a process that involves nerves and muscles that reach adult efficiency by age 4 to 5. Now, listening is actually a learned behavior. This is a mental process that's concerned with hearing and attending, discriminating, understanding, and remembering. And listening can be improved with practice. Listening affects our social interactions, it affects our level of functioning, and it affects our overall success in life. I'm sure we can all think of times where failure to listen negatively impacted us. And we can also think of times where listening really helped us out. Interestingly enough, we listen to about 50% of what we hear, and we comprehend about 24% of that. Interesting. Our listening skill can be described as passive and receptive, but it involves active thinking and interpretation, because as we are listening, even though we're receiving and being passive about it, we are immediately processing, okay, what does this mean, and what do I do with this information? So we're already engaging in that process. There are some important ways that children listen, and we should be aware of these. In appreciative listening, a child finds pleasure and entertainment in hearing music, poems, stories. It's best to begin with this type of listening because it's passive, but then it's personal for each child. What each child likes to hear, whether it's lots of stories or music or, those things are deeply individual. Then there's purposeful listening. Now, in purposeful listening, a child follows directions and they're able to give responses, start responding to questions, for example. Now, in discriminative listening, a child becomes aware of changes in pitch and loudness in the environment. We start to differentiate, and we discriminate our speech sounds. In creative listening, the child's imagination and emotions are stimulated by the listening experiences. And so we see that our thoughts are expressed spontaneously and freely through words or actions or both. Whereas in critical listening, the child understands, evaluates, makes decisions, and starts to formulate opinions. In order to encourage this critical listening, a teacher might pose questions such as, what happens if we all talk at once? Or what if everyone wanted to play in the playhouse at the very same time? Then the child has to start to think through the responses, decide the most logical solution to the problem, and then present a point of view. In terms of types of listening, a person does not necessarily always listen for knowledge, but may listen to a sound just because it's pleasing to hear. We catch ourselves sometimes doing this with music. We'll find that we know all of the words to a song without ever really having stopped to think of what the words mean necessarily, but we just, it was a catchy tune, so it was pleasing to hear. Another example would be the first time children discover the sounds made by pots and pans. They're completely fascinated by this. They think it's just amazing, but they're not necessarily trying to learn from it. They're just trying to make noise. Preschoolers often make their own pleasurable rhythmic sounds with anything that's available. And finally, we know that children may listen but may not understand. What often happens is, especially if we're having a very serious conversation with a child, well, you can't do that because that's really not okay, and it's not the time for doing the thing that you did. And because we have a very serious expression, the child definitely knows, I should be very quiet and look back at this person who is speaking to me. But they don't entirely understand what is expected of them from that point. There are 3 stages in efficient listening. The first is responding to stimuli. This is where a child asks, "What was there sound? Where was it? What sound was it? Was there more than one sound? Were the sounds the same?" They start to try to classify it. And that's then what comes next is organizing the stimuli. Well, what was the sequence of the sounds? What was the length of time between sounds? Have I heard it before? Where have I heard it? And then finally we move to understanding the meaning. What do the sounds and words mean? So what is the role of a teacher then with regard to our listening skills? What do we do with this information? Well, we know that a quality program certainly sharpens a child's listening and offers a variety of experiences. And planned programs develop skills. So when we think about this, we want to think about some examples of good teacher listening. At the beginning of an activity and during an activity, at the end of an activity, because we want to be able to foster this in young children. So we model for them that we listen to them, and then we also show them how they can listen to us by sending them clear, consistent cues about when they are to listen. Here are some skills that we can use. We bend when the children are speaking to us, not just when we are speaking. I think most teachers are very good at bending over to speak to the children. But I also think that most of us, including and I include myself in this, sometimes we forget to bend over when the children are speaking. So instructions should be clear and simple. We have to give a sequence of what comes first, next, and last. That is particularly important when working with young children because sometimes we'll tell them not to do something, but we need to tell them to do something. So to say walk works much better than don't run. We know the silent pause is effective to focus attention on listening. This works a lot better than getting louder. If we become very, very quiet, then that often works. Sometimes you might want to ring a bell, quickly, but getting louder makes the children get louder too, and it does not actually foster listening. Short songs, finger play, body movement activity that stimulates interest and draws the group together. Even our little routines like clean up, those sorts of things. Those kinds of activities do draw everyone together and help us to listen. We want to make sure to praise listening with the children. Oh, what a good job of listening you're doing. And we want to model listening, which is hard in such a busy day, but so important because the children really, really pick that up. Some purposeful listening activities are listed here for you. When you're talking with the kids, you want to start off telling the children what you're going to tell them. Well, today we're going to talk about the letter B. And then we tell the children, well, B makes a B sound, as in ball and big, and maybe you introduce an activity. And then you tell the children what you told them. Well, remember today we learned that B makes a B sound. Some examples of appreciative listening activities are listed for you here. Moving to music is an appreciative listening activity. Discussing music, rhythms, and sounds. Talking about favorite sounds. Happy, sad, or funny feelings that sounds produce. Tapping, clapping, or moving to music or rhythmic speech. For critical listening, we require that the children's evaluation of what's heard and is comprehended. We know that contemplation and reflection is very important here, and we try to develop skills in this area and use it frequently. When we talked about consume, critique, and produce, in some ways these two things are interconnected because essentially we're asking children, well, what do you think about what you heard? What do you think about what you read? Being able to be a critical thinker is such an important life skill, and it is connected to our listening. It's connected to how well we hear. It's connected to how well we then turn around and communicate something to someone else. It's connected to whether we put that to paper someday and draw a picture of it and consider ourselves to be a person with a voice in the world. So this may seem like a small thing, but it actually has big implications. So what about songs? We love to use songs in the early learning environment, and it is a very important thing to do. Well, we know that songs foster listening skills and they enhance language arts development. I bet we can all think back to some of the important, crucial information that we've really kept with us over the years because we learned it in a song. So why are songs so effective? Why are they so useful for language arts development? Well, here's a partial list of language features that we know foster language development that we see are in songs, and helps to explain why this is so useful. Expansive vocabulary. Songs introduce us to words. Predictability, having a storyline and sequence. Mary had that little lamb. Rhyming, repetition, cultural literacy. We learn about culture through our songs. I'm sure, can all think of the songs that we learned from our parents, our grandparents, and some of these will be very specific to family and to thinking about passing along that cultural literacy. Rhythmic beat. That's an important skill because language has a rhythm. You learned earlier in the semester that even infants, when they're sucking on a pacifier, suck in the rhythm of language. So rhythm is an important part of communicating with the world. Concept development, being able to carry through a concept to introduce something and understand it. Appreciative listening. Music is just pleasant. Purposeful listening, discriminative listening, creative listening, as we've talked about, and coordinating our words and our physical movement. Because again, if we know that physical growth and development is also connected to language, then you can see how this is going to come full circle and foster that strong language development in young children. So auditory activities that help children are also listed here. Recognizing one's own name when spoken. Repeating nonsense words, short sayings, chants, poems, finger plays, or words. Repeating sounds that we hear at home. Imitating sounds of toys, animals, classroom, things like the rain, sirens, or bells. Telling whether a sound is near or far, loud or soft, fast or slow, high or low, same or different. Anything where you're really talking about sound discrimination. Identifying people's voices. They love to do this. Actually, one really effective activity that you can do with young children is you can record all of the children in the class saying hello and then play it at circle time so they can identify each other. Oh, that was me. Oh, that was my friend. They love to identify one another's voices. And it's interesting because they don't always recognize their own voice at first because it sounds so different to hear it in a recording. Identifying and repeating rhythms heard, retelling a story, poem, or a part of either one, performing first one and then two-part directions, recalling sounds in sequence, coordinating listening skills with body movements in a requested way, so stomp, stomp, stomp your feet, enjoying music, stories, poems, and many other language arts, both individually and in groups. Any of these things where children are needing to listen, of course, are going to foster these types of skills. You can set up listening areas in your classrooms. Some settings for listening are talked about in this chapter. You can set up screens, dividers. You can use bookcases as dividers. With listening areas, the size of the group is very important. You have to have very small groups because there's something about listening activities, involving the headphones and the whatever type of media player, whether it's cassette or CD. The fact is that there's a lot of bodily proximity. And so it's very important to have small groups. Otherwise, children will get frustrated by the cords of headphones, or just even by trying to, if you don't have headphones and it's just coming through the speaker, the children all try to move in close, and it can potentially be frustrating. The younger the group of children, the smaller the group. You want to make listening areas cozy and inviting with partitions, soft features like pillows or blankets. You can have music activity centers where you have music coming out and maybe even some instruments or things that they can use as well. You want to have focused listening and group time. Singing games often call for child response or even child silence as part of the participation. You can have pauses even, and that's definitely useful in terms of teaching children to listen. Phonological awareness is a critical part of listening that helps get children ready for that next stage of language arts. Phonological awareness is predictive of a child's ease in learning to read. And what we do is we attend to the phonetic structure of our spoken words. So it's not just what car means, but the actual k, ah, the actual sounds in car. And phonemic awareness is understanding that spoken language is defined as understanding that that spoken language can be analyzed into strings of separate words, and that words can be analyzed into sequences of syllables and phonemes within syllables. Now, alliteration is repetition of initial sounds in neighboring words or stressed syllables. So this is a great strategy that we use with our young children when we teach them, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. And we're, teaching them these repetitive sounds over and over again. That helps them to become aware of the actual sounds of language. In terms of phonemic awareness skills, we know that the phoneme is the smallest unit of speech, distinguishing one utterance from another. Phonemic awareness is required to make connections between single alphabet letters and sounds. In order to develop phonemic awareness, we need to concentrate on a couple of things. Onsets and rhymes, for example, are kind of the first tier of strategies in teaching this. Onsets are any consonant before a vowel in a syllable, and rhymes are the vowel in any consonant after it in a syllable. So I have some examples listed for you here. In the word back, b is the onset, ak is the rhyme. And in the word stale, st is the onset, ale is the rhyme. In pick, p is the onset, ik is the rhyme. In same, s is the onset, aim is the rhyme. In play, pl is the onset, a is the rhyme. And in click, cl is the onset, ik is the rhyme. So what can we do to help children gain phonemic awareness? Well, we read and reread favorite nursery rhymes and tongue twisters. We reread favorite poems, songs, and stories. We read alphabet books to children, and we make alphabet books together. We discuss words and make lists, word banks, and other collections of words. We identify similar sounds and letter sound patterns in children's names. We emphasize selected letter sound relationships while writing with, for, or in front of children. We encourage children to explore letter sound relationship with magnetic letters and other letter toys. We help children write the sounds they hear in words as they start moving more into the writing phase. And when we read together, we do help children use prior knowledge and context and initial consonants to predict what a word will be. So if you see the word moon, and you know that a child knows the word moon, and then they see the word soon, you can say, well, it looks kind of like the word moon, but you see, look at the letter. What sound does that make? What does the S sound make? And you can walk children through in that way. As a final thought, any activity that helps children to hear the meaning of words and of language, the pattern and the rhythm of language, and any language sounds that we use to communicate, ultimately is going to help that child to develop their listening skills and to foster their language development.